parents and students deserve better than this. Our city deserves better than this. And my job as mayor is to negotiate the best deal for the teachers, for the staff, for our students. And that's exactly what has been done.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel.
Jeff Berkowitz, Public Affairs here in Chicago.
And Jeff, we have been covering the Chicago teachers strike, as many others have, and the budget details, and now finally the teachers strike is over, and here on Friday, November 1st, the students are back in the classroom.
Sure, everybody's saying, thank goodness it's Friday, thank goodness the strike is over. Look, if you're a parent and you got some kids and you had, especially if they're younger, you had to deal with them. You had to bring them to your job. You had to get them in a separate daycare center. Yeah, the schools were open, but they were very little used as a daycare center. But what nobody's talking about, because the media don't want to talk about it, because they don't understand it, except for you and me, Terry, is, and wire points, and maybe a few others. What's the cost of this damn thing, okay? I mean, the CTU has a budget, CPS has a budget of $7.7 billion. When they came up with their 2019-20 budget, did they plug in an anticipated cost of the new contract? They probably wouldn't, because that would be kind of a giveaway for bargaining. And if they didn't, does that mean they have to go back and write that in and find out? And over the next few years, what's going to be the increase? You know, the media say, oh, it's a 16% increase. Well, that doesn't capture anything. And it doesn't tell anybody in Chicago the magnitude of their problem. Remember, we have an $11.6 billion Chicago budget. We have a $7.7 billion CPS budget.
And Jeff, let me bring up just a graphic here just to kind of give an indication for the people, but you know what kind of financial shape these budgets are in, and this is before the settlement of the CPS strike.
There you go. So you see CPS, what is it? What's the $1 billion there in the hole? What does it say, like $14 billion or so? 29 billion in city of Chicago. See, that takes the budget and the assets they have, and then it subtracts their pension liability and other debt liability for both the city of Chicago and CPS. CPS is in junk status below Detroit. Chicago is just about there. And nobody's talking about that. It's, oh, isn't it wonderful? The kids are back in school. It's such a crock. I mean, I just don't know how people put up with it. I mean, well, there you go, Terry. Is that blunt enough for you?
You know, we've been covering this, and earlier this week I talked to Ted Dabrowski with Wire Points, who's a financial expert, for lack of a better term, and let's take a look what Ted was saying as he was considering the cost of this to the city.
Illinois residents, Chicago residents, are putting more and more of their tax dollars into the pension funds in an attempt to make them healthier. And it doesn't matter how much more they put in every year, the pension funds are less healthy. So it's almost like putting money into like putting water into a bucket with a huge hole in it. The more you put in, the more that comes out.
What we want to say is, while we're talking about the specifics, and I'll have you tell us more as specifics, the other thing people have to realize, as Ted Dabrowski was bringing out, is that on the back end, this is going to be raising not only salaries, but it's going to be raising the pension costs. And as we just showed the people, the city and CPS are already on the fast track to bankruptcy.
Right, and so not only will it's raising salaries, as Ted said, and it's also raising pension costs. There's also the so-called support staff, the 200 additional psychologists, 250 social workers, or did I have that reverse? Okay, there's the expanding salary increases, not just for the teachers, but the teaching assistants going up, I don't know, something like 50%. I mean, and then the healthcare costs are going to continue to escalate, and there's almost none of that increase is going to the teachers in the new agreement with CTU. That is, they pretty much kept it constant as to deductibles, co-pays, etc. Nobody does that. Well, Jeff, yes, we do at CPS. Okay, because as Lori said when I asked her about a month ago, our mayor, Lori Lightfoot, When I said, you know, okay, you've given them all these things they want, you give them the salaries they want, you give them the benefits they want, what did you get? And then she said labor peace, and then she thought, well, she didn't really know yet if there'd be labor peace. Turned out there wasn't labor peace. Turns out she got, notwithstanding that she gave them all those things, number one, okay, what did she get? A strike that went on longer than anything for the last 30 years, 11 days. And then at the end, where did she draw the line in the sand? Oh, she said all along there would be no compensation for, as she views it, compensation for striking.
Well,
So in the
before we
past,
go there, okay, well, I mean, you brought that up. Let me play a couple of bites here so that the people can follow. First, we're going to hear from Chicago Teachers Union President Jesse Sharkey, and then we'll get a response from what the mayor had to say about his comments.
Our union does not have a return to work agreement. Our delegates told us in no uncertain terms they were not going back to work unless there is a provision made for making up the instructional days that have been lost over the last 10 days. Our members want to return to work. Everyone was clear about that. However, the mayor of the city of Chicago has said that we will not be able to make up lost instructional days.
Not once during a 3.5-hour meeting did they raise compensation for strike days. Not once. The issue never came up. I've been clear from day one that CPS would not make up any strike days. And at this late hour, we are not adding any new issues.
well, you know, that's nice. I mean, to draw the line in the sand on whether you're going to make up any strike days. And then what she said is, I'm not saying we won't. She said, I was annoyed. She said she was annoyed that CTU announced unilaterally they thought they could just have a compensation or makeup for 11 days. What they mean, folks, is when you're striking, you're not getting paid. So the unions assume, well, they'll just, at the end of the normal year, somewhere in early June, we'll just tack on 11 additional days so they don't lose any of their compensation. And what the mayor said, you know, all along was, we're not doing this. And I thought she would cave. Well, she didn't cave completely, but that's what they were fighting over. And my point here is there should have been a fight over the important stuff. I mean, does
And what's
anybody
the
know in
important
the city?
stuff?
Well, this contract, I'm doing this as an estimate with the information we have, which is not as much as we should have, you know, as the public and the media. But with that estimate, I'd say the contract's going to add on about $100 million in the first year to the teacher costs, okay? And in the second year, it'll add on about $200 million. And in the third year, it'll add on about $300 million. You get the gist? In the fourth year, about
What's the
400
basis of your
million.
numbers that you're getting this, Joe?
Well, it's very rough, but I'm using as an estimate the numbers that said the current average salary is about 78,000, okay? I think nobody really disputes that. What there is some dispute is what it'll go to under the new contract. But CPS says, so I'm taking a number, that it'll go to about 100,000 or thereabouts. So if you take that 78,000 and you escalate it about 4,000 a year for the next 5 years, you get to about 98 or 100. And I'm estimating that increment of 4,000 a year, but it's cumulative. So in the fifth year, the increase is not 100 million additional, but 500 million. You add up all of that, it's like 1.5 billion. Now I ask you, with all due respect to the mayor, should you be fighting about whether they get compensation, so to speak, for 1 day, 2 days, 11 days? Or should you be fighting about maybe it wasn't a good idea to agree to the salary increase that they did? It's complicated. There is an arbitrator or whatever the person was called who looked at this and made recommendations, but still there was an agreement by CPS to that big increase. And so where is that 100 million going to come from? As I said, that's for the that's for the CPS budget, which is 7.7 billion, not City of Chicago. But again, the taxpayer is the same taxpayer, whether that taxpayer is paying an increased cost for the City of Chicago budget or for the CPS budget.
Right, so,
And
and look,
that's my point.
when you get to
Sorry.
these big numbers, there can be some variances, everyone knows. And I have often pointed out to people, like when they hear something from the Congressional Budget Office, I pointed out, I don't think the Congressional Budget Office has been right in their estimates for the last 30 years. These are projections, so you can't put, hang your hat on the exactitude of these numbers. But we do know that with the settlement, the cost to the taxpayers in the city of Chicago are going to be going up. And we also know, the mayor had said, no matter what happens, and she said this, I think, back over the summer, that the city is going to be facing, over the next 2 years, another $600 million in pension costs. So it just keeps getting deeper. And by the way, I just want to underscore for our viewers that when Jeff and I are bringing these issues up, we're not here just pontificating. We're doing some original reporting and looking into this and trying to give these issues the time that they need, which often you're not getting from some of the other news sources. Not that they're bad reporters, but they're just not given the time. Often when you do local news, as I've done local news, you get 2 minutes to cover a story, and it's just not enough time to get into some of the details. Jeff, earlier this week, let me play another bite from my interview with Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints, and he was talking about, what's going to happen and just how it's going to be harder on the taxpayers in the city of Chicago.
And it's not just that we can't sustain what we have now. Let's look at what Lori Lightfoot has negotiated right now. She has negotiated 24% increases for teachers over the next 5 years. She's negotiated or given 48% increases for the average nurse. She's agreed, so that all increases the pension cost. Again, we already have a problem, now it's going to be worse. She's also now agreed to add more people. When you add more people, that of course means much more in pension obligations. So we are still growing the problem. It's not like we figured out, it's not like we said, okay, we have a problem, we got to control it, let's slow it down. I think Lori Lightfoot's contract offer, with all due respect, has thrown fuel on the fire.
Well, that's the point. Look, and a lot of thanks and credit goes to, well, your interviews with Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints. So obviously we're getting a lot of information there for those interviews. If people go to wirepoints.com, they'll see we've borrowed some information, and sometimes that opening chart, of the big hole for CPS and say Chicago, that's thanks to WirePoints. So sometimes we forget to say it. If there's a useful bit of financial data, probably came from WirePoints. Folks, you can just assume it, even if we haven't appropriately credited them. And that's, of course, Mark Glennon and John Klinger and Ted Dabrowski, all at WirePoints. But what Ted was just saying there, I was sort of saying the same thing, is that, it's all of these additional people or additional salaries. And you can come up with estimates, and I'm sure CPS has them, when they say, and when did, a lot of this is back-ended, and that makes the cost a little lower. So they've said things in the agreement like they'll have a certain number of new nurses, maybe 200, by 2023, or maybe 250 new social workers. This is new. So you got new salaries, new pensions, and there's no reason why CPS certainly now can't release that data, and they probably could have released it while they were negotiating. I mean, people can read. You can just put it up on the website, but they don't, okay? I mean, seriously, I don't think it's there. And if it's up there, it's almost impossible to find. And my point is, how can taxpayers be expected to make rational decisions when they vote every 4 years, when the institutions we have, like CPS, don't go out of their way to make that information available on their website? It's outdated to say to the citizens, come and beg for it and FOIA it and so forth. It should just be up there. But the main point here is that's a tremendously expensive contract. Nobody has quite published the data as to how expensive. And the same thing with the budget that we're working on now, okay? I mean, I made a mistake in the last show. I said it's 11.6 billion, really wasn't an increase. It was, okay? My bad. The prior budget was something like 10.6 billion. So in these tough times, it's going up about $1 billion. And some of it you'd say is mandated, so it's not discretionary. That is some of the salary increases for the city of Chicago that contribute to that $1 billion increase, or a part of contracts with their unions, okay? And some of it's the pension payments that are being escalated, but nobody's talking about it.
And
And
speaking of wire points, let me bring up, just to add to your point, a graphic that our friends at WirePoints put together. That is the total amount, so we have how much debt it would take per household. So right now we got, as you see, Chicago in red, $134,000 basically debt, I'm rounding off, per household compared to other cities. And this is to the point that you were bringing up, that when you add up all these different costs, too often we're looking at the trees and missing the forest. This is bringing up the forest. This is the debt that we're piling up. And what Ted Dabrowski had mentioned in his interview is that this number, $134,000 per household, is also somewhat unrealistic, because a lot of the households, the average household, is only bringing in something about $55,000, $56,000, and there's no way they can pay that. So if you're going to put that on the backs of some of the higher income households, the number becomes more like $400,000 per household if you think that you're going to ever have that paid off. And as Ted would say, and others have said, that's not going to happen, because those people who have higher incomes also have the means of leaving the state, leaving Chicago. They're just not going to sit there, even if they just don't leave the state but move out of the confines of Chicago. They're not going to sit there and be at Target and be paying all those hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay off these debts that people in Chicago, the politicians, have racked up over the years. And people, maybe you would be one of them, Jeff, others are critical of this deal that was just made, that they would say, here, Lori Lightfoot just didn't negotiate tough enough. She went in basically saying, I'm going to agree to most of your demands, we're in agreement, and she still got, as you mentioned, a long strike, and now
Well, why
here she
not?
is,
Yeah.
adding cost to already an overburdened Chicago taxpayer.
These data are available to her and her team. Why not 3 months ago, instead of just signing off on this, go into a press conference and say, no, we're not going along with the recommendation. In fact, we're withdrawing our offer of 14%, because it's been painted to me, has been outlined to me, she might say, by our team. Look, I just had to go to the governor and say, can I get some help with our pension liability? And basically he said no. So folks, we can't afford a 14% increase, which we offered. In fact, so I'm withdrawing that. I'm saying we should cut our costs and ask the union to cut their salaries by 2% a year, total of 10% minus. Now, maybe you'd negotiate and say, well, let's negotiate to a freeze. I mean, and then and if you want to argue to the public, say, folks, just what you just said. Once you work it out in terms of this debt per household, pension liability per household, $400,000, I can't get more people here. That's what we need. We're never going to get by with declining population for 4 years in a row. The mayor said this. The important thing to her is attract people, attract companies. She agrees with that. It's just that this is not the way to do it, okay? This is not a contract. Anybody looking at that saying,
well,
okay,
and as
let's
I
do
think
some
the
of those
mayor
other
found
cities
out
like
that, as the mayor found out, and as she mentioned in her press conferences, she thought she was going to buy political peace with the union, but as she kept saying, they keep moving the goalposts on me. And I think from the union standpoint, it appeared that they said, we're getting a 5-year deal. We might as well put everything on the table we can now, because then we're going to be living with it for 5 years. So every time the mayor kind of thought she had a deal, one other thing would come up, just as we referenced in our earlier sound bites from both the CTU president and the mayor, over whether the teachers are going to get paid for these days that they were on strike.
Right. The only thing I know of that they didn't get that they wanted was they did want a 3-year contract as opposed to 5, because then they could put more pressure on her in the year she's running for re-election. Now she's Now the contract goes through and past the election, so she doesn't have to worry about this. They're smart, CTU, and she gave on that, okay? She got her 5-year contract, or at least CTU gave on that. And then they also wanted prep time. That is, they found some working at home, I guess, or not in class.
Jeff, let's
and that
move
would shorten the day.
Yeah, I want to move along just some of the other topics
Those
here.
are the only two things. Those are the only two things. And the last thing I'll say is, and Ted has made this point as well, when you talk about the Chicago budget or the CPS budget, you got to think long term. And everybody's always thinking, how do we get through this year? Okay. And so that's why we have this major pension liability, because the city of Chicago, the state of Illinois, the county of Cook, all the politicians have promised these benefits, and somebody else is going to have to deal with them in the future. And so if you want to turn this around, you got to start thinking long term, not 1 year, but 5 years. If you're doing a 5-year contract, you better be thinking about the 5 years.
I do have another bite from Ted Dabrowski if we want to use it, and basically.
Let's go on. I think you.
Okay.
Let me just go on.
What he said is just to your point is that they have no long-term plan, and that they are just hoping every year to get by year, but next year is going to be bad. The year after that's going to be bad. There's not a whole lot of optimism to be had here. Now, also coming up on November 12th, we're going to have the House of Representatives and the Illinois Senate, the legislature in their veto session. They just had 3 days in session this week in Springfield. They were pretty uneventful, except for the Republicans calling for a new ethics plan, and obviously, Jeff, that's coming in the midst of a lot of scandals happening around the state. In fact, as we record this, just today on November 1, one of the House members who's been implicated in the investigation, Representative Luis Arroyo, has submitted his resignation.
You know, Terry, there's a tendency to go day by day as the news breaks, as today with Representative Arroyo resigning, and just a few days ago it was disclosed that it's alleged he offered a significant bribe to a state senator. It's alleged or asserted by, who is it, the Tribune, one of the media organs, that that bribe was to Senator Terry Link. Is that right, Terry? Not that it was. No, I'm not asking.
No, that's the allegation. Senator Link denies it, but the Tribune has said that they've confirmed that it was Senator Terry Link who apparently, according to reports, and we're not judging him, Senator Link has served in the Illinois Senate for quite some time, but some say that he has had his own problems behind the scene, and that was why he wore a wire.
Whatever. You know, here's the point, that people should keep it, keep focused on the big picture. Okay, if you're reading this in the paper and hearing on the news, the mainstream media are good in covering fires. If there's a fire, they're there. Okay, if there's a shooting, they're there. So these are little fires that are set. So first there was this fire about Ed Burke. Okay. And they dealt with that, sort of. I mean, he's not gone to trial yet, but there's an indictment. And then there was Danny Solis wearing the wire, which was tied to him. And then there was Senator Sandoval. And then there was the Capital Fund. And then there was Sandoval sitting on the committee that's going to be dealing with the allocation of the funds of that $45 billion capital fund. So each way there's a little short-term. Governor says, okay, Sandoval has to step down from that committee position, not from being senator. Okay. And now there's Representative Arroyo. And then there was a subpoena that went out to Exelon and a few other companies. And then there were the village suburbs on the south side. Okay? These are just little silos, little fires. I mean, it's nothing to worry about. Hey, go back in your home.
Even in Chicago, or even in Illinois, this seems to be getting unusually active activity going on here with these investigations.
Okay, so Terry, here's the question for you. What is the big picture about these investigations? In 30 seconds or less.
I have no idea.
The big picture, you have an idea. Is the big picture is this. John Lausch is the U.S. attorney, the new sheriff in town. Some of these investigations apparently go back to 2016 before him. The U.S. attorney's office, working with the FBI, are very methodical. Look, the legal process is relatively simple. Somebody drops a dime. Now it's like they drop $10. You used to have phones where you could, put a dime in and make your payphone call for a dime. Anyway, they drop a dime and they let the U.S. attorney know, hey, do you know what's going on here and there? So the U.S. attorney, who has 100 assistant U.S. attorneys or more here in the Northern District of Illinois, operating out of Chicago, he sends these people, not all 110, but maybe 15 or 20, to work on doing an investigation, to finding out what that rumor was, and then they they send out a subpoena, and then they do a raid, and they start gathering information. Now, some of these people who are raided are not necessarily guilty. They just may have information relating to this investigation. They're not what they call a target or a subject. So we don't know any of this, and so much of it's allegation. But my point is, here's what we do know: something big is going on. This is not
That we
just
can
about
tell.
Arroyo.
That's the big picture.
Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing
And
a little.
Exelon is the major company. We're not convicting Exelon. We're not trying them.
We're not convicting anyone.
They're the
We're
ma-
just pointing
they're-
out
they're
that
the
there's a
major
lot of
company
activity going on, and
They are
it's,
the major company that comes up in a lot of these, the information that's being released.
right. Let me
that
move
is
on to
being-
the other big topic of the week. Is obviously, as we tape this the day before, on October 31st, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a procedural vote on impeaching the President of the United States. I had the opportunity to do an interview with Congressman Rodney Davis of the Central Illinois District, the 13th District, and I asked him about his thoughts on what was going on.
We are seeing unprecedented actions in the House of Representatives right now in regards to impeaching this president. What we've seen over the last few months has been a parade of so-called witnesses coming into the most secretive facility that we have in the House of Representatives. Terry, that is our Intelligence Committee hearing room. I can't go down there when these hearings are taking place. I, as a member of Congress who have top secret clearance, I cannot go read the transcripts of these witnesses. All I rely on is the same thing you rely on and everyone else does, with selective leaks going to major news media outlets who take those leaks and turn them into news stories.
Okay, Rodney, that's nice, Congressman Davis, but that's all process, and that's what the Republicans are doing. I'm not sure they understand as a party, or I'm not sure they have formed an opinion, but here's the deal. Okay, Trump and his attorney general, the top law enforcement officer, go to the Ukraine and say, we think there's some things that happened that shouldn't have, that may have been corrupt in 2016, when Biden was there and son Hunter were running around doing things. We'd like, since we think a lot of this happened in Ukraine, could you guys look into this, okay? We've been helping you a lot. Now, is there anything per se with what I've just said, anything per se illegal? I suggest not, okay? Really. Because, and now it's portrayed by the media and MSNBC. Oh, they went over and they said, dig up some dirt for us. But see the difference? Here's the point.
Right.
Rodney and others should be talking about what is being alleged here. Is there anything wrong with it? If there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, the other thing they're
surely
talking about, we don't have a whole lot of time here, but is that just this entire process, as Rodney said, as Congressman Davis said, is being handled out of the norm of any other
I
impeachment.
know, that's a process thing. Let's go to the core. If there's nothing here that's illegal or impeachable, cut out the damn investigation. Have some guts. Say something, okay? Republicans.
Well, again, this was one bite out of a close to a half-hour interview that will air.
I'm just saying,
We just
but
did
the whole
it this
team is
morning.
doing this. That's the Republican team is
Jeff,
doing
we'll be
it.
following this in the
Okay,
future.
fine.
We're going to be out of time, so thanks again to our viewers. Watch, comment, and subscribe, and Jeff will keep everyone informed, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.